The Canola School on realagriculture.com is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Hi, I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. I am here today with Michelle Chabot from BASF, and we're going to be talking about Club Root. So get ready for this. It's going to be a really great conversation. So let's start off with some really basic stuff, Michelle. Tell me a little bit about Club Root. Like, what is it? Some basics.
Yeah, so Club Root is a soil-borne disease. So it means it spreads through soil. And what it does is when it attacks canola plants, it really forms these galls on the roots, and that affects the nutrients from going up into the plants. So that's where it becomes really detrimental. It causes the plants to mature prematurely, and then we don't get that same yield. So it can be extremely devastating when you have large patches of Club Root in your field. And yeah, these big galls, when you pull them out, it's very noticeable, especially when you time your scouting, which would be end of July into August. If you wait too long, then we do see some of those galls starting to degrade, and it's a little bit harder to see at that time.
Okay, so how has Club Root changed in the last 5 years, and how has its significance changed? Because this has been ongoing, right?
For sure. So it was originally found over 20 years ago, so back in 2003 in the Edmonton area. Since then, we've seen Club Root spread. So it's spread from Edmonton all throughout Alberta, for the most part, into Saskatchewan, into Manitoba, and then we've also seen it in the northern states as well. So it varies depending on the area. So some areas are still going to be more of our hot pockets of Club Root, and then some areas are going to just be where we're maybe just starting to think about what we want to be doing to managing Club Root in certain areas.
Okay, so with that regional, Club Root spread, what geographies are most affected by it today?
So right now we're still finding it a lot in Alberta. So around Edmonton and in and around within probably a 2-hour radius. We've seen it for the last 20 years. So we've had to learn how to manage that over 20 years. Seed companies through that time have also released Club Root resistant hybrids, which has allowed growers to help manage. We do want to focus more than on just genetics and have a whole integrated pest management approach. So this would be looking at your rotation. So having a 1-in-3 rotation for canola, having a look at potential patch management. So depending on where you're finding Club Root within your field, maybe patch management is something you can look at. Sanitation of your equipment. So I know that can be something that's really difficult to do, but just trying to remove as much soil as possible before moving on to your next field. And scouting. So coming out to the field, look, do you have Club Root symptoms? Do you not have Club Root symptoms? From that, it will help to determine what your next step is. And then your last stand of defense is genetics. So looking at what genetics you potentially need to be putting into your field to help you with your Club Root management.
As Club Root has spread, I'm going to guess that there have been a broadening of pathotypes or races of Club Root. So how many are there known today?
So as of this spring, Steven Strelkoff's lab has found that there are 55 different pathotypes. So that does not mean that there are 55 different pathotypes in every single field where we do find Club Root. They will vary in prevalence across Western Canada. Some we may find more of than others, and others we may find very little of. So we want to make sure that growers aren't focusing so much on the number of pathotypes in the field and focusing more on what we can do to just manage Club Root as a whole.
Because the management techniques would be the same no matter what pathotype, is that correct?
Yes. So at the end of the day, we want growers to be looking at rotation, scouting, these different things. And then from there are first generation resistant hybrids. So these are the same across all seed companies. So it's the same Mendel resistance that was found and bred into these first generation resistant hybrids. So those are resistant to 5 different predominant pathotypes in the field. And then we have second generation resistant pathotypes, or resistant hybrids, and these will vary across companies, and you can check out different charts online to be able to find out what some of these hybrids will be resistant to, and then you can look to maybe cycle those through your different canola fields.
Right. And are there any sprays available for clubroot?
At this time, there are no seed treatments, no crop protections available to be able to help manage clubroot. So this is where it's important to focus on that whole system approach,
Right.
on being able to manage clubroot and then following it up with genetics.
So rotation, rotation, rotation.
Yes.
Okay, so if I'm planting clubroot hybrids, do I need to rotate them? If I do like multiple different hybrids, can I just get away with planting it a couple years in a row, or?
So first you need to look at what area are you in. So if you're in an area where clubroot hasn't really been a problem, you need to determine if you should be even growing a clubroot resistant hybrid to begin with. So that is the first step. So if you haven't and you're starting to see symptoms, or there are other fields in your area that are starting to see symptoms, I would say consider just switching to growing a clubroot resistant hybrid to begin with. Mm-hmm. If you're in an area where clubroot has been around for a while, again, be scouting your fields, but our recommendation is to do a first generation hybrid for 2 cycles or until you start to see symptoms, whichever comes first, and then consider switching to a second generation resistant hybrid. So if you have been growing it for 2 cycles, then for sure look at considering switching to that second gen, and that'll be able to help with any potential clubroot symptoms that you see in the field.
Okay, and you said if you see symptoms, what would that be? What would you be looking for?
Yeah, so when you're going out to your field, some of the common areas that we start to see clubroot are in the field entrances. That's where equipment first comes in, first folds down, clumps of dirt fall off. So we start to typically see symptoms there. If you have low spots in your field, water runs, I would check those areas out as well. So when you're coming to scout that end of July into August, and you're going to be pulling plants out. Sometimes you can see that the plants are wilted, maybe they're maturing a little bit faster than the rest of the area of the field. You want to pull those plants out. And if you start to see galls on the bottom of those plants, you likely have clubroot in your field. But yeah, definitely scouting diligently, going to every one of your field. Just because you have it in one doesn't mean you may necessarily see symptoms in another field.
Okay, so even if you're going in between your own fields, you want to make sure you're doing those management practices.
100%, yes. And because at the end of the day, you could be traveling 10, 20 miles between fields to be able to farm your land. So if you can manage where you're spreading clubroot, that's going to be your first line of defense. So just trying to knock off as much dirt as you possibly can before you even leave the field to go to your next one.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Michelle, I've decided I do have clubroot in my field. I've gone out, scouted, found symptoms of it. How do I know what clubroot varieties I should be planting, and what would I be asking my seed grower for information on this?
Absolutely. So BSF has come out with a chart, and on the chart we have our predominant clubroot pathotypes that we're resistant to. So it will have all the InVigor hybrids on there, so you can check out, our first generation resistant hybrids, and everything is all labeled so you know what is first gen, what is considered a second gen, as well as the different predominant pathotypes that are within that hybrid. So when you have a look, you can look to see, okay, if this is a first gen, these are potential pathotypes we're resistant to. So the one problem that does exist is that there's no currently method to test your field to know what pathotypes are in your field. So this is where we talk about cycling through, that you use a first generation hybrid for 2 cycles and then consider switching to a second generation resistant hybrid unless you found symptoms. So if you found symptoms in those first gen, then having a look at that chart and seeing that second generation is going to be able to cover off a lot more predominant pathotypes than the first generation pathotypes.
That's perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so how do growers determine clubroot effectiveness then? Like, how do you know if it's actually working?
So going out to your field and scouting, that's going to be the number one way you're going to be able to find out how that hybrid is performing in your field. So going out, pulling plants, seeing if you're finding any clubroot. If you're starting to find clubroot, then it's talking to your agronomist or your sales rep to come out to the field and see if this is a problem and that you should be looking to consider switching to that second generation resistant hybrid. But scouting is going to be the most effective way to find out what you have going on.
And if you see some clubroot, like how much is too much if you're seeing it in your field?
That's an excellent question. if you're starting to see like significant patches that are going on, so if you only have one plant in maybe 100 or 1,000 plants, that is going to be part of the resistance package. Resistance is not 100% for anything, but if you're starting to see where you're starting to find multiple plants in patches, then this is something that we need to look to consider of switching on to the next resistance hybrid.
Okay, so you would say even if you found one plant though, it's good to go to your agronomist and actually get them to come out?
I would get your agronomist just to come out just to maybe help scout the rest of your field.
Right.
Because just because you found only one plant in one area, maybe there are other areas that could be affected or maybe not. Another good idea would be just to keep track of where those patches are occurring. So a lot of the systems now, you can map everything out for your field. So having that mapped out in your field, and if it's not a big problem, then having a look at your next cycle where you have canola coming in, going back to that same spot and monitoring it. Has it grown larger? Has it stayed the same? And then you can determine what your next steps forward are going to be.
Okay, so at least that way you know if it's getting worse or better or...
Yes, absolutely.
That's great.
So if you do find a patch and it's only one patch in your field, that's where we can look at that patch management. So there are a few different options available. You can lime, that's something that you can do, seeding back to a cereal in that area, or just a grass. So if you want to do maybe an alfalfa grass mix, so that can be something that can stay there for more than 1 year, and just to help with that spore load to be able to reduce the spores that are there.
So how has management with clubroot varieties changed in the past year? So we're going to kind of go back to that variety topic, but yeah, how does it change?
So seed companies first, when clubroot became an issue, had to even find resistance to be able to put into their hybrids, to be able to even have genetics to be a play for clubroot resistance. So through that, it's changed. So when we started with one company coming out with one hybrid, another company coming out with another, and then now it's become very common practice for most seed companies to just have an automatic base package in most of their hybrids. Still, not every hybrid on the market will have clubroot resistance. So if you do have clubroot in your area, do talk to your local sales rep to be able to see what, hybrid is going to be best to grow on their farm.
So what tools are available to help the public figure out what hybrids to grow? Where would they find this information?
So a lot of company websites will have a lot of information on there. So if you check out the BASF website for our InVigor hybrids, we have the chart laid out that shows our first generation, second generation hybrids and the predominant pathotypes. And then you also maybe want to consider what other factors are in your on your farm. So if you're in a short season zone, a long season zone, having a look at maturity, what type of hybrid are you looking to grow? If it's going to be a commercial hybrid, a health hybrid, maybe you need to be also looking at what herbicide system that you want on your farm as well. So those are things that are all found on websites to be able to figure out what's your best choice. One of the other great choices is talking to your sales rep or your technical service specialist to be able to get some extra help on what maybe fits best in the area. There are local trials that happen every year, so checking out those websites, the results, those start coming out at harvest time to be able to see how maybe one specific hybrid performs in your area. And then checking out the Canola Council website. So they have a lot of great information on there. They have information on clubroot. They also have information on a lot of other canola pests when it comes to diseases, insects, and just general canola information as well.
Okay, so it's great to hear that there's a lot of support, at least out there, when it comes to clubroot. Do you have any words of encouragement for growers going into this season?
We've been at this for a little over 20 years now, and we're still able to grow canola pretty much everywhere. So I think just being able to stay on top of your integrated pest management, working on your rotation, sanitation practices, scouting, and then lastly, looking at genetics. So if we can stay on top of that, I think we can still be really positive on having canola on our fields for a long time more.
Well, that's wonderful. That's so much information to take in, and thank you so much for joining us. And that was Michelle Chabot with BASF on Real Agriculture.